All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to day two. This is super exciting. Thanks to everyone who was here yesterday. I am super grateful to all of your engaged questions and comments and all of that. If you saw it, we put out our kindness word cloud on social media, so go check that out. Again, thanks so much for participating so amazingly. And we'll go ahead and get started with this panel today. So I'm going to introduce Briona, if you want to come on camera here. I'm so grateful to have her with us again. Hi, welcome, welcome. Do you want to talk a little bit about your work and kind of plug what you got going on?
Sure. There's so much. So I'm like, let me think a minute. I'm Bree. My pronouns are she, her. I am a Black queer woman living in Connecticut. I recently moved back north. I've been living in Austin, Texas for 8 years. My background is in mostly nonprofit work with a lot of emphasis on fundraising and community organizing and activism work. I'm the host of a podcast called The Tea with Bree, and I have been on the board of Random Acts for 4 years now, 3 years, 4 years. It's been a minute. But yeah, I'm just really excited to be here with y'all today.
Awesome. We are so excited to have you. So this panel, we wanted to really give you guys some tangible and practical advice as to how you can kind of go through the world being a little bit more of an effective ally and reflecting on some stuff that you guys may have questions about. So I know that the broad definition of allyship is an active, consistent practice of supporting marginalized groups through advocacy, education, and action. But the first question, Bree, just what does allyship mean to you? Very broad question, I know.
Broad but big. I think like you just said, I think allyship is a verb, like it has to be a thing you are constantly working at. I think we saw a lot, with the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement and a lot of support of the AAPI community the last few years. And also now with everything happening in Gaza and all over the world, I think a lot of people have been showing that allyship is activism. Like you have to be doing something. And so for me, allyship is just the act of speaking up, of taking action, of making impactful changes and really owning, like honing in on what you can do in your space. I think for such a long time, people were like, well, if I can't be where like the thing is happening, or if I can't do X, Y, and Z thing, I'm not an activist. I'm not doing what I need to be doing. And for me, I'm like, no, you're doing it. You're being an ally. You're showing up in the ways that you can and using whatever platform you're on, if it's social media, if it is being, someone in your community, taking up space and using it to highlight things that are happening and letting people know what's going on.
Yeah, totally agree. Can you share a moment in your career, your activism work, even or in your personal life where allyship made a tangible difference for the communities that you were supporting?
Yeah, I mean, I think about the time when I was still in Austin, an organization I had the honor of working with, Austin Justice Coalition. I was doing some fundraising for them and kind of started out as a volunteer and ended up getting a job because that's on brand for me. Um, but they, as an organization, were doing a lot of work around like holding police accountable. Austin's police budget was really high at the time. And it was a lot of conversation again during the Black Lives Matter movement and stuff happening during the pandemic. And so watching them in our community really rally around, okay, what are we using these funds for? And really leaning into the thought of like, instead of defunding, is like, how can we reallocate funds? And so they did a lot of work. They did petitioning. They did a lot of protesting, and they are able to get another option added to when you call 911. So it wasn't just fire, EMS, and police. They also had a mental health service person who was able to come out. And so free, it was like this tangible thing that the community wanted and made known to the people in positions of power and made that change. And so I think, even now thinking of, seeing other cities that have now done that, of like the trickle effect of that and what it's been able to do around the conversation we have around mental health and emergencies and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, definitely we've been touching a lot this weekend on like that ripple effect and how like even something that might seem small at the beginning can like make a huge impact. So I love that. That's amazing. How do you balance being an ally in both those personal and professional spaces, and what lessons have you learned along the way of navigating that?
Yes. I think one of the biggest things that I always think about too, going back to like allyship and activism have to be a verb. But then also prioritizing rest and remembering that rest is also resilience, especially as a marginalized person. If you're a woman, if you're queer, if you are differently abled, like there's just so many things as people that we go through ourselves and then we want to show up for other people too. It is that putting your oxygen mask on yourself first mentality of like, you can't do things if you are exhausted. The saying of like, if you don't rest, your body will prioritize rest for you. And I have seen so many of my friends and myself get burned out because we're like, well, if someone doesn't do it, I have to do it. And instead of like talking to people or like delegating, which I have been trying to learn to be better about, but like reaching out for help and having those conversations and venting and being in therapy. And so, yeah, just really remembering that like you can show up and do these things and you also are allowed to take a break. I think there's also a lot of nuance around that concept. I think a lot of people saw like ally fatigue during the pandemic. And I know like a lot of friends and I had conversations of like, as a Black person, I don't get to like stop being a Black person. And I feel like the same thing can be said for allyship. Like, I don't get to stop being an ally, but I think there is something to be said around like resting, finding joy, and taking a step back for moments that you can come back better.
Love that. Yeah. When we created this kindness word cloud in the opening ceremony, and I had them give words to describe what kindness meant to them. And one of them put resistance. And I thought that was really awesome because it's true. I mean, like you said, joy is also a form of resistance in a way. Um, let's see. Next question. What are the most common misconceptions that you think there is about allyship, and how can people move beyond the performative support to take meaningful action?
I think the misconception is that like if you aren't like big air quotes around this, like if you aren't a person of like importance or prominence, or if you don't have a platform, you can't be impactful. Um, and I wholeheartedly disagree. And I think for me, it has really been the last couple of years, but even going back to like the civil rights movement, the act of boycotting is like one of the biggest things like people can ever do. And I think, with everything happening in Gaza the last year, going into like almost full 2 years, if you really think about it, which is devastating. But the conversation around talking about companies who support the genocide, and seeing online and people using social media to talk about, what does it look like to actually boycott and to use the positions of power that we are in holding the people who we vote into office accountable, especially after, the election. No matter how the presidential election turned out for you, if you're happy about it, if you're sad about it, I always remind people like the thing you're going to feel the most is your local politics first. And so truly seeing how people are holding the people accountable who are their senator, their mayor, their governor, of like, who are you? What do you align with? And I can hold you accountable because you are more accessible to me. Like, if I call the governor of Connecticut, I'm more likely to get a call back from him or his office, versus like calling the president, right? Like, there's just like this level of impact that you can really feel. But seeing people who have called for like better gun reform and like abortion access, like seeing all the things that have gotten and have continued to be really important to us, this unpacking that misconception of like you are tiny, air quotes, or like you can't do anything, and seeing like the amount of people who like have joined Zoom, who have done boycotts, who have done protests, and that level of like we might be one person, but collectively we can do so much. And I think that's like the biggest thing for me in allyship is like you don't have to do it alone, right? Like you can talk to people, you can build a community around that as well.
Love that. Awesome. All right. I'm going to start by asking you guys to answer this question in the chat. What areas of allyship are you most interested in improving? And this can be how to be a better advocate, what education resources that you're interested in hearing about, how to better amplify voices, how to better confront biases that you might not have, anything like that. What areas do you guys want to hear about? What What are you thinking? I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts in the chat down here. And then if you are interested in coming on screen to ask a question, go ahead and toss that hand up and we can promote you guys and get some questions going here. Ooh, that's a good one. That's a good one. I don't have any specific resources off the top of my head for that, but I know that one of the things that we always say is look local first, like we just mentioned. So search in your area for any groups that might need support before going to broader sources. There might not be any places around you that are looking for volunteers, but you know, it's always better to start in your hometown and then expand beyond that if necessary.
I also will say too, like if it doesn't exist, I encourage you to build it, right? Like there's so many resources out now. I think about the last panel we did, and I can't remember the person's name right now, and it's going to make me really upset. But we had been talking about, how due to the pandemic and some other health stuff they really can't leave their house. And we were saying like, well, the ACLU and like there's so many other ways of like there are organizations out there that are totally like Zoom capable or like you can get on a Google Meet with people. So even if like you can't be out in the world, there are still so many options for you too.
Love that. Definitely agree. Let's see. When speaking with someone who fundamentally disagrees with you on rights, what would be a good goal for the conversation? It's a really interesting question.
Yes. Um, Personally, what I have always leaned into when having conversations with people who we are aligned differently, is like it is not my job to persuade you. It is just my job to give you my perspective. And being like, I'm not going to argue with you. I don't need to like yell and defend where I stand. But we can have a polite, cordial, grown-up conversation, and still disagree. And if we do get worked up or I feel like this isn't really going anywhere, I will also say in the conversation, like, I am willing to have this conversation as long as it continues to be healthy and positive for the both of us, especially if it's a person you have a relationship with. And I kind of keep that same energy with people who I don't really know, but I kind of have a little less patience of like my safety is my priority. And as a person in this conversation, I also want to be respectful of you and my boundaries. So also having that same energy of like I at any time can walk away, and it doesn't mean that I have like air quotes lost this conversation. It has just come to a place where it is just unsafe for me.
Yeah, absolutely. If you guys would like to leave an anonymous question, by the way, you can utilize the Q&A box. If you're not comfortable attaching your name to a question, but you'd like to hear something, go ahead and use that. Or if you just want somewhere to put your larger questions, go ahead and use that Q&A box too. Like I said, if you want to come on screen, feel free to raise your hands, but also absolutely no pressure. We are here to talk about what you guys want to talk about. Someone said general resources for being a better ally, and I think this is a good time for Bree to come in with her list of books here.
Gosh, I know I have been like slacking on my reading, so I will own that right now. My life has been in a very weird transition. Um, I will always tell people I'm a memoirs person. Like, I just love to hear other people's stories. So, I'm like, if there's a person, an activist, a celebrity that you really enjoy who has like done stuff that you feel really connected to, see if they have a book or a podcast out that you enjoy. Getting your news from a reputable source that you trust. So, like, I am an NPR person just because I feel like it gives me the news in little tangible bites that don't cause me anxiety. They have a podcast called Up First that I really enjoy. There's another podcast that I'm going to cheat and look at my phone and get because I can't think of the name right now, but it is a woman who was trained as a lawyer and then stopped doing law and started a podcast. It's called Unbiased. And so she gives the news in a very neutral way. And it's always like both sides of the political party. It is just like the news as it is with the facts. And she does her own research. And I just really like her. It comes out every weekday at like 3:30 Eastern time. And it'll give you the news for the day before. So for me, like that's one I really trust. So any of the NPR ones, that one I really like. And then as far as books, I will always stand by Me and White Supremacy by Layla Syed, as opposed to the White Fragility book that I just can't get behind. And I'm sure there's more than I'm not thinking of right now because I recently gave up coffee. So, but those are those are the ones I would recommend.
Focusing energy on one or fewer causes versus every new cause that comes up. That's a good question. Good general advice on that.
Yeah. I think as a generation, as a community that is constantly on our phones, we're inundated with information a lot. So I wholeheartedly support you finding the one or two things that mean the most to you and really leaning into that. And if something else comes up or something else gets your attention, also giving yourself grace with that. Like you are a human being having this experience on this planet right now. I think a lot of folks feel I'll speak from the I know like I get overwhelmed of like there are so many things I care about all the time. But depending on the current political climate or where I live, like there are just things that kind of go out of my brain for a little while because it's like something I don't really think about. Like, for example, right now, I'm back in Connecticut, so I'm not doing as much abortion access work because I live in Connecticut. Whereas when I lived in Texas, it was something really important to me. And I think that's okay. Like, I'm still keeping in touch with my friends in Texas who are doing that work, and asking, when it is time for me to like share something, or is there something coming up that I can bring attention to? So I think that's totally fine. We are allowed to give ourselves grace while also caring about other things.
Yeah, love that. And scrolling back up a little bit because I realized I missed one. How better to help my active duty folks as we near a possibility of having a sec def who wants to kick out our gay and transgender members? And that's a really good question.
It is a
It's not
very
something that I think, yeah, either of us can speak from personal experience on, but happy to give our best.
Yeah. I have had the honor of working at queer organizations and sitting on boards for queer organizations. And so I would like Maddie and I have talked about like reaching out local to see what is available to you. I also want to say like if you can afford therapy or you can help like gift a month of therapy to folks or helping to find resources for folks who need like affordable therapy, I think that's a really big one. And then again, same thing. I think it is just keeping the folks who represent you in the know of the things you want. Like they have to answer an email, they have to call you back. Like it may be an automated message, but they have to truly acknowledge that they've gotten this message from you. And so I would just say like continue to use your voice, use your platform, and remember that they work for you. And I always love like organizations that like will prepare a script for you because people will get phone anxiety, which is totally real. Or like Googling it or like what like finding a way to like have the script done for you or an email like done for you that you can just send off. I think that is also super handy that I always think. But and then also I think just supporting folks that are in your own circle who may be having these experiences and saying like Maddie just said, like, I can't put myself in your shoes, but I can empathize, I can be there, I can listen, and I can support you in the ways that I can. And I think for me, always being like, I am here to support you in whatever way feels best for you. And sometimes I may know, I may think I know what's best for you, but I have also gone to friends like, how can I support you in this moment? And that's not to add more work to your plate. It's just so that I can show up as a better friend and ally in this time.
Sure. How to be a stronger support system for my transgender fiance who's terrified of the world ahead of us. She wants to transition, but with events coming up, preventing it potentially. It's a heavy question, and I have so much empathy for anyone dealing with this right now. I know that it's extremely, extremely scary times.
Billion percent. And I think it's too, I have personally been leaning into there are still good people in the world. Like I think we again can like doom scroll or like just be online and just see all the negative. But I'm also like, make that algorithm work for you. Like there's just so many positive things out there too that I want to lean into and name right now. There's still resources, there's still people doing this work of fighting for those rights. And I just want us to remember that too, of like this is again very scary, validating everything you just said. But then also coming on the other side of like we have gone through and survived terrible, terrible days before. And I think our community is going to be what saves us moving forward.
Agreed. I have a similar question. What are some ways you would recommend supporting minority groups in the face of a really scary presidency, whether in person or online?
The first thing that came to my mind was like like blocked and blessed. Like I am the queen of just being like, I will not let this into my atmosphere. Um, and like one of a person that I really admire, the actress Sophia Bush, like I have been watching her use her platform to really name things and call things out and literally like sharing like the red receipts of like people who are in her inboxes being terrible. And I think that's like a thing we also while also keeping ourselves safe. But like putting a name to like putting a face to these people, like I think for me, it's always like there is someone behind that keyboard that is choosing to do this. And so I'm always like, is this coming from a place of maybe they're fearful, maybe they feel some type of way? And then also on the other side, being like, but it is not, it is also not my job that I have to carry this at the same time, right? So I think it's kind of back to the same things I was saying before, like finding your community, leaning into your support systems, finding resources, looking local, um, finding things like this online with Random Acts and other organizations that create a space for conversation and support, I think is what's really important. Um, and also knowing that like I don't want this to sound flippant, that is not my intention. Of like, it is 4 years. We have survived scary before, and I think we can do it again. But I think this time, having gone through it before and seeing like it's gotten significantly worse in the last couple of years, of truly leaning into your community and asking for help. I think, from my experience for a long time, I was so afraid of to like ask for help and be vulnerable and I think now we have to really lean into that because you're not the only one you're not having this singular experience, right? Like we have all gone through that feeling before. So I would say that too, like truly honestly lean in, and know that your people love you and they want to be there for you.
Yeah, agreed. And I think one of the things, the easiest things to do is if you're in a position of privilege and you're able, like obviously, like Bree said, we keep ourselves safe. We make sure that we are taking care of ourselves first. But if you're in a conversation with someone and they say something that's not okay, they say something that's harmful, call it out. Say something about it. You know, I
Mhm.
think a lot of this stuff gets by because people are scared to be confrontational, and I understand that completely. But it doesn't have to be. We talked about this a little bit in Misha's panel about how, saying something about something doesn't have to be mean, but it
Mhm.
can just be a, hey, I don't really think that that was an okay thing to say, or hey, I think you should reconsider that, or I think you should look into this. It doesn't have to be a fight, but you
Mhm.
also don't have to let it slide.
Yeah. Yeah, you can be direct and not have to be confrontational for sure. Yeah.
See, we had a question in the Q&A box. Please keep these questions coming, guys. These are awesome questions. I love the act of boycotting companies that do not advocate for the marginalized, but sometimes it feels like I am just one person and won't make a difference. How much of an impact can one person make, and how can you make that impact the most?
Mhm. I again boycott, I automatically think of Rosa Parks. Like you cannot I validate what you're saying because it is a lot and we're inundated with news all the time, but that impact that she had, like we imagine if she had never done that, right? Like there's just again the ripple effect, the butterfly effect, like there's so many things that are still happening. And I think back to like the conversations we've had after, you know, all these terrible shootings, like the needle is always moving forward, and more people I think are getting inspired. And I am upset with the number of folks who did not vote in the last election, while also validating like the two-party system does not work for everyone. But we can tangibly see how not voting actually does impact things. And so that's why, like, even though voting sometimes doesn't feel like it's going to make a difference because there's so many things and so many barriers and things that occur. But we also see like if voting wasn't important, voter suppression wouldn't exist. And so I always think of that too. Like if your voice did not matter, they would not be working so hard to silence you. And so I'm always like, you may be one person, but you are so impactful and so important. And again, combined together, we are even more of a force to reckon with. And I think that is also a thing we have to remember of like, we're alone right now, but if we come together, imagine how much more we can do.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think this also applies to some people like Daniel, like you said, that you were emailing the Republicans on the trans erasure bill. And that's amazing. And even though only three people acknowledged it, that was still incredibly important work because you were one out of many, and that is what they listened to, the pressure of the people. And so even if it didn't feel like it was making a difference, and even if it didn't end up, the bill still got passed. At the end of the day, there's only so much we can do, and us, similar to how Misha said, getting that kind of wrapped up in the I didn't do enough, I'm not doing enough is incredibly damaging to us, and it doesn't, it doesn't help us help other people in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else have any questions? Like I said, please feel free to use the Q&A. You can leave one anonymously if you don't want your name attached to the question. But while they're thinking up some new ones, I know we're keeping things positive, but is there anything that you wish that people would avoid or stop doing when it comes to allyship or that performative side of things that we were talking about?
Mm. I think one thing I wish people would stop doing when it comes to allyship is thinking that it has to look the same for everyone. And I'll use an example like a friend of mine who is very active and doing a lot of work with the work for Gaza and ending that genocide. And we've had a lot of conversations because she gets really upset with like people who aren't doing the level of boycotting, of activism, of things on her level. Um, and I try to validate her, like, you are allowed to feel how you feel, billion percent. I go, but also I think we have to also name and center that like other people have other things going on too. Like I think it's like we can walk and chew gum, right? Like I can care about what's happening to the folks in Gaza and be like, I want this genocide to end and using my platform to say that. But I can also be focusing on what's happening here in the United States around like kids going hungry and the fact that like we don't have universal health care and gun reform and all these different things. And I'm like, I think one of the biggest things in America is like we are always focused on saving everybody else, and we also don't focus on saving people in our own country. So that's been a really big conversation of like, I just want all of us to use our anger for good, for fuel in a way that's going to change things for the world, but also at the same time, like not ruin the relationships we have because we think it should look a certain way. So like luckily she and I are able to have this conversation, but there's like other friends she has and she's like, I just will never understand how they can just like not say anything. And I'm like, that's very valid because you are so in it, like you are so connected to it. And I'm like, that's also, you're allowed to feel that way. But I also just always try to give the perspective.
Yeah, good answer. How do you approach people who are hardcore in their ways against a minority group? The short answer to this question for me is I don't usually. But
Mm.
Bree.
Yeah, I just can't. I'm with Maddie. Like I just can't. I think also like as a person who grew up in the Northeast, like one of the di most diverse melting pots in the entire country, like I have grown up around people who looked different and sounded different and practiced different religions and had different ideas than me my entire life. But also as like I've gotten older and started to realize that I have people in my life who align differently politically. Um, it is I've now become that friend that like my friends don't want to talk politics with, which I'm like, that is okay with me. Like we don't have to exhaust ourselves. We can still have respect for each other, but like now I can't label you as a safe space for me, and that's something we need to acknowledge. And I think like too, as you get older, I'm now 34. My 30s have been all about like protecting my peace. I'm not explaining myself. I'm not defending things. Like, if I am wrong, I am wrong. I will own that. I will apologize. But if it's something I believe deeply in that, we are just never gonna align on, we can also like walk away from this relationship and just be. When I see you, we say hi, we say bye. But like, I think of a friend of mine she and I are aligned politically, but her husband and I are not. And great dude, like I have nothing against him. We just don't talk politics. Like we are just never going to align on the same views politically. But it then trickles into like, who are we as people in our belief systems as well? Like we have a lot of queer friends. We have a lot of friends of different minorities. And I'm just always like, it is a question I ask her of like, how do you do this? And so yeah, I feel like I'm rambling, but I'm just always like, there you are allowed to call people in, call people out, and you are also allowed to just politely decline and walk away. And I think that is a thing that we have to remember as we move through our lives the next couple of years in particular, of like, it is okay to just be like, hey, we clearly don't align on things. I think for this relationship, we either don't talk about this or we just don't talk at all.
Yeah. I think it goes back to, I keep calling back to Misha's panel because unfortunately he was very wise and he gave really
And
good
yeah, what
answers.
are you gonna do? Sometimes you're gonna
Yeah,
say,
right. But he brought up, he told this the story of this black gentleman who went and spoke with a bunch of KKK members and ended up leaving the KKK. And I think that is a very extreme showcase of allyship and advocacy work and all of that. It is not for everybody, and there is a purpose in that work, just as there is a purpose in every form of resistance. But that is an extreme, and the day-to-day person should not be putting themselves. We are not meant to be consuming the amount of vitriol that is coming our way on the internet. So I recommend, like Bree said, blocked and blessed. Use that block button. If there's someone who is talking horrible comments in your messages saying horrible things about minorities, or even if you just see it in general, just that person, you can't, there are some people that you cannot budge people on, and we can't waste the energy in those people. Like I said, there's a purpose in that,
yeah.
not for everyone. And it's okay that it's not for you. You don't have to feel bad about not wanting that vitriol to come your way.
Yeah. And I want to say there's no shame in walking away. Like I think a lot of people end up feeling like guilty or I failed or I didn't do X, Y, and Z. I'm like, that is also not entirely your work. Like allyship can look like speaking up when it is a challenge that you think you will still be safe in, right? Like public speaking and using your platform in a way that is like not going to bring harm to your door at the same time. Like, like you were just saying, like the gentleman who was able to go into the KKK and gave people to give up their hoods and leave. Again, an extreme example. In a level of bravery that I'm like, I, not me, not today. Um, but also saying like if there's ever an opportunity in like a public like a thing happening like at city hall or town hall or like your representatives in community, like you can go and give testimony, like those I think are like tangible moments where it is safe for you to speak publicly in a way that is like organized and constructive, and you can write it down. You have a certain amount of time that you can be prepared for that and still cause an impact. So I'm like, there are ways to do that in ways that are still able to keep you safe and sound.
Sure. In my country, it is still not accepted that we are going in a different direction. What can I do, especially if you grew up in a family like that and the world laughed at your family member who is transgender?
Mm.
First of all, so much empathy, so much love.
All
We
the
we
days so much.
Yeah.
Uh, can you read the question again? I'm sorry.
Yeah. In my country, it is still not accepted that we are going in a different direction. What can I do, especially if you grew up in that family?
Mm. I think it's like we were just saying of like to share a personal note, I don't talk to my dad. Like my father and I have no relationship because he has become a person in my life who is not a safe person for me, who is not a person that I want to hold space and respect for, right? And it got to a point where my therapist was like, you are harming yourself by trying to keep this relationship, and for who, right? Like, I think as I've gotten older as well, like family can be everyone and does not just the people we are tied to genetically, right? And so I would say to like lean into the family that does support you, lean into the friends and community that do. And then also as far as like your country going another way, empathize 1,000,000,000%. And I think it's like we've talked about here of like there are still going to be pockets of the resilience if you want to have a Star Wars reference of like we are still going to be fighting and doing the work. And again, like we've said, like if you can be a part of that in a way that is safe for you, I would encourage you to do so. I just want to give everyone the permission to, because I feel like people feel like they need it. You don't, but I want to encourage you and give you the permission of like, if you feel called to do something, do it. Like now is the time. Like I think it was Emma Watson who was like, if not me, then who? And I think that is a beautiful question to ask in your allyship and activism journey of like, if there is something you want to say or do and it's not happening, or you don't see yourself in those spaces, you are more than welcome to be the representation that you want to see. And I think that is something that we're going to have to really lean into the next couple of years.
For sure. Kind of question in the Q&A here. Do you find that people can't hear the point that you were trying to make because they repeat every observation you make about larger issues as a criticism or attack on themselves?
Yeah. I am really direct. So this might be rude, and I own that. I've also been in therapy a long time. So I would be like, are you listening to respond or are you listening to have a conversation? Because those are two very different things. Like, are you listening because you want to take it in and see my perspective and have a conversation about it? Or are you just listening so that you can use that to be like, well, da 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 da. I'm like, no, 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 we don't have to argue about this. I can just tell you the things, and I tell people sometimes you don't have to respond. Like you can just sit and listen and just be like, I hear you and I need a minute to process that before I give an answer. If you would like to continue to talk, I would like to continue to process. And I think it really just gives you a chance to actually listen and be like, I hear you and I am paying attention, and I haven't constructed an answer yet because I'm trying to truly understand and grasp your side first. And I think whenever you name that for people, it just really it throws them off. Like I think so many people just always like are having a conversation to like respond right away. And so like I think I do the same with text too. Like if I'm having a really anxious day, like, hi, I have gotten this text. I'm not in a place to respond currently, but I will later. Right. Like I think it's just that level of respect of like, this is important to me and I want to give it the attention it deserves, but I also can't right now, or I also haven't come up with the answer to respond yet. And I think it just really like changes the way we have conversations as well of like, you don't have to have all the answers. It is okay to not know the answer. It's also okay to like just not know a thing and name that and be wrong. And I think about a lot of leaders that I work with of like it is okay to be a leader and say, I don't have the answer. Can I go get it and come back to you? Because I just think people in positions of power just feel like they have to always have the answer. And I'm like, no, I love being wrong. I love figuring things out. And that's why I also challenge people who are doing this work too, of like, it is okay to not know and to find the resource or to like think and meditate on it and then come back to us and have a conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. While we're Please feel free to submit more questions. We have about a little over 5 minutes left to go. So if you have any last minute questions, but I did want to kind of give you guys a couple of like actionable steps for effective allyship. We touched on this a lot. We touched on listening to and amplifying marginalized voices. Bree, do you have any tips on how people can improve their listening skills? Because also, like we were just touching on, like asking people to listen, it's also sometimes our job to listen to people who are making arguments that we might not want to listen to, but we still have to listen and have that effective conversation.
Mm-hmm. Um, I tell people like if you have a bad memory, it is okay to be in a conversation with someone and say like, I am listening. Do you mind if I take notes while we talk on my phone, on a piece of paper? And just be like, I just need to organize my thoughts and I want to make sure I'm listening to everything you are saying. So I think that's the one I would lean into. Um, I think it's also too like active listening, which you can Google. It's also like a really big thing in therapy. Your therapist does this if you go to therapy of like listening to everything someone said and be like, what I heard was X, Y, and Z. Is that correct? And I think it just, one, it shows the person that you're listening, and two, it gives them the chance to be like, well, no, I didn't mean that. You got this, but I actually meant that, right? And I think it just opens again a level of like vulnerability and connection and intimacy in a conversation that we typically don't really offer ourselves when we talk about conversations. Um, and then also always just being like, I think whenever you walk into a conversation, whether it's professionally, personally, in an activism way, I think going back into the I'm willing to have this conversation as long as it is one of progress for us. And I think about a time like I had an argument with a coworker of mine, and I was like, I need to walk away from this because I'm no longer listening because I am upset. And this is not going to be a good experience for either of us, and I want to continue our relationship in a respectful manner. So I'm going to walk away. Can you allow me like 10 minutes to come back? And I think it just truly names of like, this is important to me. You are important to me. And although I am angry, I don't want that anger to affect our relationship. And so I think it's just naming that too of like as a person who gets really passionate and emotional in conversation, and can for most of the time keep it even keeled, but there are just sometimes I'm like, I am not in a place and I want to name that because I respect both of us too much to have to continue this. And I think it just also models to them too of like you are important to me, and I also and I know that I am important to you, and this is a relationship, and it's not me and you versus each other. It does mean it is not me versus you, it is me and you versus the issue. Um, and I just think that really just always shifts things for people.
Yeah, for sure. I like that someone said in the chat, you are talking at me, not with me. That's a good
Yeah.
one. Um, we talked also about educating yourself on systemic issues without, and this is another thing, without placing the burden on marginalized communities. And we've talked about this in some of our previous panels as well. But when it comes to finding those reputable sources, what are some tips you have for people when they look at those sources to kind of figure out how to trust a source?
Ooh, yes. I would say I always say Google is free, but make Google work for you. I would say if there's a person who you trust, like if there is a person who aligns with you politically, or someone that you know in your communities, asking them for where they get their news, where they get their resources. Um, for me, like I said, I've named the podcasts and the things that I listen to because I can go, like, for example, the woman who does the Unbiased podcast, she lists the resources for every episode. So you can go and read it for yourself. And I think that is just like the like upfrontness. I can't think of the transparency. There it is. The transparency that that gives you of like everything that I have told you, you can go and find yourself, right? And I think that's just like a level of checking resources, a level of like respecting the source, finding the source. So I think it's all those things of like if you're going to believe something, like keep digging. It is okay to keep digging. And I think it's also too, for as long as we have TikTok, which I am a TikTok university girly. It's how I learned how to do my makeup. I think that TikTok can be such a resource. And I think too, like, again, our attention spans are so small these days. But finding those people online that like maybe bring something up that you really think about, and then making a note in your phone or writing it down of like, tonight when I can't sleep, or tonight when I'm making dinner, or like tonight when I'm having a conversation, I want to circle back to this and like figure this out, or learn more. Because I think like we get so busy in our day-to-day lives, that we can kind of like things just kind of fall off of our plates. But I always remember like prioritize what is important to you. Like if there's something you really care about, set aside the time. Like for me, some nights I'm like, I haven't read any news today. I need to like listen to this while I brush my teeth. Or, I start every day with like a song that I know is going to put me in a good mood. Like I'm always just like, do what works for you. And I think that is a good practice to get into. And also like I've mentioned the NPR podcast Up First that I love because it's like 10 minutes. That's all I need some days. Like I just need a 10-minute catch up, and that is the news I need, and it is a way to start the day, or have it at lunch, or kind of take a walk and listen to it. Like break up your day, and do what is, good for you. Drink your water, sit by, if you can't go outside, sit by a window. Like there's just so many things of like we have to also nourish ourselves that I think we in a way like we can sometimes forget to do.
Yeah. Agreed. And then my last thing on the list is just supporting organizations or initiatives aligned with inclusive values. And all three of those things, listening to and amplifying marginalized voices, educating oneself on systemic issues, and then supporting those organizations can really make a difference. I mean, we've seen it in the United States with the Land Back movement that has been incredibly efficient in several places across the country, because of people, day-to-day people who are standing by and supporting those initiatives. Bree, can you think of anything other tangible examples like that off the top of your head? Sorry to put you on the spot, but just offer
Oh,
people some hope as we leave.
um, gosh. I don't know. I think one of the biggest things for me, like naming a thing that has changed in a time when I think didn't think it would, of watching the states who have codified abortion access after the election, I think is a big one. States that have codified school lunch for kids, I think is a big one too. Of like there are still people in positions of power who are like, we are going to put as many things in the books in like stone before things shift. And I think that's a really big one. So I would tell people like, see what's happening in your state, in your city, the news that is occurring. Also, always, again, just be paying attention to locals. So like what's it called? Like your city council, like see what is happening, know what districts you live in for every single voting block that you're in, and just be paying attention to the things and also paying attention to what your representatives are doing. They represent you. And so you should be making sure that they are doing the things that you want them to do. And if they're not, you get to call them out, which I'm also like, this is like a power move. Like, I
Yeah,
think
it's the
some
fun part.
people think of like politicians and all these people like I can't touch them. I'm like, you basically sign their paycheck. Like you are their boss. So you are allowed to like do a review like that you aren't doing what I need you to be doing. And this is like what it is. And I just think like that shifts the mindset a lot for people of like they are a position of power, but they work for you. And so that means you are more powerful. So
Yeah, that's right. All right. Well, thank you so much for doing this with me. I know I'm gonna hop onto the next one directly now, and then we're gonna open it to you guys at 1 o'clock. I can read the clock. So I'll hop on over there, Bree, if you want to hop over to that link. And then at 1 o'clock, we will see you guys over there for the conversation about depolarization. So we're doing a nice segue here. And we will see you guys at 1 o'clock. Bye, everyone.